Every moment can be captured, shared, and turned into content. But in 2015, one online group took this idea to an unsettling extreme. On VK, Russia's most popular social media platform, a group emerged with a disturbing idea: a selfie competition where participants were encouraged to take photos with dead bodies for cash prizes. The group, called Selfie with the Deceased, openly encouraged its 500 members to pose with corpses, claiming it was a way to change people's attitudes toward death. Winners could earn between 1,000 and 5,000 rubles, around $10 to $60. One of the most notorious photos in the group showed two members posing next to the embalmed body of Vladimir Lenin at his mausoleum in Moscow. Lenin has been dead since 1924, his body preserved for public viewing. The page quickly filled with pictures of people standing beside open caskets at funeral homes. The administrators even had rules for the competition. Participants had to be smiling because, as they put it, the deceased had, quote, gone to a better place. At first, the group remained underground, quietly growing its audience, but it wasn't long before their actions crossed the line. The group's admin announced a $50 prize for the best selfie taken with the body of a 13-year-old girl who had died in a car accident. Her grieving family was already devastated. Now, they had something else to fear: that strangers would show up to her funeral just to take pictures with her corpse. It was this announcement that finally caught the attention of Russian authorities. The police launched an investigation, and the page's administrator, a man named Alfred Polyakov, was quickly identified. Polyakov, who claimed to be a 28-year-old university professor from Donetsk, defended the contest. He insisted it was not about disrespect, but about helping families cope with grief. In a phone interview, Polyakov explained his reasoning. "We created the group to change popular attitudes toward death." He insisted that there were rules. Underage users couldn't participate, and families had to give permission before a photo was shared. As the controversy grew, VK took action. Polyakov's profile was blocked for suspicious activity, and the group itself was removed. Polyakov compared the contest to Victorian post-mortem photography, a 19th century tradition where families would pose with their deceased loved ones for a final portrait. But while those photos were meant as a way to honor the dead, the group's contest felt more like a disrespectful spectacle. On the night of July 16, 2011, in Port St. Lucie, Florida, 17-year-old Tyler Hadley turned his family home into a horrifying crime scene. For weeks, Tyler had been planning something. He told a friend that he wanted to throw a party unlike anything that had ever been done before, one that would go down in history. At 12:15 p.m., Tyler posted on Facebook, "Party at my crib tonight, maybe." No one knew what that message really meant. That afternoon, Tyler's parents, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, went about their day, completely unaware of what their son was about to do. As soon as they got home, Tyler took their phones, so they couldn't call for help, and locked the family's black Labrador in a closet. He knew the dog would try to protect them. He took 3 pills of ecstasy. At 5 p.m., Tyler walked up behind his mother, Mary Jo, as she sat at the computer in the family room. He gripped a claw hammer in his hand, then he swung. The first blow landed on the back of her head. She screamed in pain and confusion. The sound was so disturbing that Tyler's father, Blake, rushed out of the bedroom. His wife was on the floor, blood pooling around her. Their son was standing over her, holding the hammer. "Why?" his father asked him. Tyler responded, "Why the fuck not?" Then he attacked his father next. Blow after blow, the hammer came down on his skull and his face until both of his parents were dead. Tyler dragged their bodies into the master bedroom and spent 3 hours cleaning out the blood. He took anything that reminded him of them and piled it all on top of their corpses, as if burying them in their own belongings would make them disappear. At 8:30 p.m., he walked to an ATM and used his dead parents' credit cards to withdraw cash. Security cameras captured his face as he stood there, funding his party with blood money. By 9 p.m., guests started arriving. The house quickly filled with around 60 people, all there for a good time, completely unaware that 2 dead bodies lay hidden in the bedroom just down the hall. People played beer pong in the kitchen, but something felt off. Some people talked about a weird smell. A few joked that it smelled like a dead body, but no one thought to check. As the party went on, Tyler started telling people what he had done. At first, no one believed him, but his best friend, Michael Mandel, did. Tyler pulled Michael aside and said, "Dude, I killed my parents." At first, Michael laughed. He took Michael into the blood-streaked master bedroom. There, under a pile of towels, books, and furniture, his parents' bodies were hidden. Michael was horrified. He wanted to leave. He wanted to call the police, but instead he stayed, and he took a selfie. They stood together, knowing he'd never see his best friend again, the other having just destroyed his own life. Michael later said he took the selfie because he knew this would be the last time he ever saw Tyler as a free man.
He told me if I look at it enough, I could see signs. I looked on the floor, I could see signs of blood, and that's when I went around back and looked in his parents' bedroom.
After you saw this scene, what did you do?
I was in shock. I was sitting down, I didn't know what to do.
Was he worried about what to do with the bodies or anything like that? Or you just
No.
Did he act like he was concerned about getting in trouble?
No, well, he was going to commit suicide once he got caught, but that failed.
Hours later, after leaving the party, Michael did what he knew was right. He called the police and told them everything. By 4 a.m., the police were at the Hadley house. When officers arrived, Tyler seemed calm and detached. The officers asked Tyler where his parents were. His response was, "They're in Orlando." Tyler was arrested on the spot. Tyler pleaded no contest to 2 counts of first-degree murder. He couldn't be sentenced to death. He was a minor, but he received 2 life sentences. While in jail, Tyler bragged about the murders. He signed news articles about himself with the words, "It's hammer time." Behind bars, he loved the attention, acting like he was famous. In 2016, his sentence was overturned because the judge hadn't properly considered alternatives to life without parole. A new sentencing hearing was ordered. In 2018, Tyler Hadley was resentenced to life in prison, this time with the possibility of review after 25 years. On April 1st, 2014, 2 Dutch tourists, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, set off on what was supposed to be a simple hike. The women, both in their early 20s, had arrived in the small town of Boquete, Panama, just days earlier, ready to explore the region and volunteer with local children. They were young, adventurous, and eager to experience a new culture. Some sources say they took with them a dog that belonged to the owners of a local restaurant. The women wrote on Facebook that they intended to walk around Boquete, and it was reported that they had been seen having brunch with 2 young Dutch men before embarking on the trail. The 2 women never returned from the hike. In the weeks that followed, the quiet town of Boquete became the center of a disturbing mystery. The owners of the restaurant became alarmed when their dog returned home that night without Kremers and Froon. A full-scale search began when the 2 women failed to show up for an appointment with a guide the next day. Their families, who had been receiving daily text messages from them, suddenly heard nothing. Authorities combed the forests for any trace of them. Helicopters flew overhead, but there was nothing. Then, 10 weeks after they vanished, a local woman stumbled upon something eerie. A blue backpack sitting on a riverbank near the village of Alto Romero. Inside were their belongings, 2 pairs of sunglasses, a water bottle, a small amount of cash, 2 bras, an insurance card, and their phones and a Canon camera. The condition of these items was perfect. The phones revealed that the women had made their first emergency call just 6 hours into their hike. At 4:39 p.m., a call was made to 112, the international emergency number. 12 minutes later, another call was made to 911, Panama's national emergency line. None of these calls went through due to poor reception. Over the next several days, they desperately tried to reach help. The last call attempt was made on April 6th, after which Lisanne's phone battery died. But Chris's iPhone was turned on multiple times until April 11th. Oddly, after April 5th, the phone was being turned on, but no correct PIN code was ever entered again. Then there were the photos. Their camera contained images from April 1st, showing them smiling as they walked along the scenic El Pianista trail. Everything seemed normal. But the final known image of them alive was taken around the Continental Divide, where the trail crosses into dense jungle. After that, things took a dark turn. On April 8th, a full week after they first got lost, the camera took 90 photos between 1 and 4 a.m. These were unlike anything else on the memory card. Most of them were taken in near total darkness, using the camera's flash to illuminate the jungle around them. Some show the thick trees and tangled vegetation. Others appear to have been taken near a ravine or river. One photo captures a stick with plastic bags carefully arranged on top, possibly as a marker or signal for rescuers, and another shows the back of Chris Creamer's head. But why would they be taking photos in the middle of the night? Some speculate they were trying to use the camera flash as a distress signal. Others believe they were being stalked and were trying to capture evidence of whoever was following them. As investigators combed the area near the river where the backpack was found, more disturbing discoveries were made. Chris's denim shorts were located on a rock along the riverbank, several kilometers away. At first, rumors spread that they had been neatly folded, but later reports disproved this. Then, the real horror was uncovered: a pelvis bone, a hiking boot with a foot still inside, and then, scattered across the jungle floor, 33 bones. DNA testing confirmed they belonged to Chris Creamer's and Lisanne Froon. But the condition of the bones raised more questions than answers. Lisanne's bones still had some traces of skin attached, suggesting a more recent decomposition process. But Chris's bones were stark white, as if they had been bleached, something that can happen due to sun exposure. Forensic experts examined the remains and found something puzzling. There were no signs of animal bites or scratches, no marks that suggested foul play. It was as if the bones had simply been scattered. In total, only around 10% of Froon's and 5% of Creamer's bones were found. The most accepted explanation is that the two women became lost after wandering off the trail. Disoriented and unable to call for help, they may have attempted to follow a river, a common survival tactic. But the jungle is unforgiving. It's filled with steep ravines and hidden cliffs. One theory suggests that Lisanne may have injured herself in a fall, and Chris, unable to help her, continued on alone before succumbing to exhaustion and exposure. The nighttime photos could have been taken in an attempt to signal search teams or navigate in the darkness. Others believe that Chris and Lisanne were not alone in that jungle. Could they have encountered someone who meant them harm? The fact that no PIN code was entered on Chris's phone after April 5th suggests that she was either no longer the one using it, or she simply forgot it. The photos, the abandoned backpack, and the eerie details surrounding their disappearance have fueled countless theories, but the truth remains unknown. In the early hours of January 17, 2024, a crime so twisted left Argentina in shock. The crime took place in the Vicente Lopez neighborhood of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Their victim was a 92-year-old woman, alone in her home, completely defenseless. The gang, 3 minors and a 26-year-old adult, broke in. They gagged her, beat her, and tied her to her own bed while they looted her house, searching for anything of value. They took her wedding rings, a gold chain, her iPhone, and 50,000 Argentine pesos, about $45. But they weren't satisfied with just robbing her. Before they left, they stopped. They turned to face a mirror, and they took a selfie. The image is haunting. The 3 masked teens stand in front of the mirror with their faces covered. Next to them is the elderly woman, hunched over, her hands tied, weeping. Hours later, the same gang struck again. This time, they targeted another woman, stealing a 32-inch television before escaping in a Volkswagen Golf, the same car they had used in their first attack. They posted the selfie on social media. Investigators trawling through social media found the image. It spread like wildfire, sparking nationwide outrage. Authorities moved quickly. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and social media analysis led police straight to the suspects. Raids were carried out across the northern suburbs of Buenos Aires, and one by one, the gang members were arrested. The prosecutor requested preventive detention and a swift trial for all 4 suspects. They were charged with 2 counts of aggravated robbery. More details are unknown. Brittney Gargol was an 18-year-old from Saskatoon, Canada. Raised by her grandmother due to her mother's struggles with addiction and an absent father, she refused to let her circumstances define her. Friends described her as bubbly and hardworking, always striving for something bigger. On the night of March 23, 2015, Brittney went out for a night of fun with her best friend, Cheyenne Antoine. The two had been close since 9th grade, bonding over their difficult childhoods. Cheyenne had lost both of her parents at a young age and had spent her life in the foster care system, where she suffered abuse. They understood each other's pain and had always been there for one another. Before heading out, they stopped by a friend's house. Brittney borrowed some gas money, hugged her friend goodbye, and left. That was the last time anyone but Cheyenne saw her alive. Hours later, at 12 a.m., Brittney posted a selfie on Facebook with Cheyenne. They were smiling, getting ready for their night out. That post would become crucial evidence. At 6 a.m., a passing driver spotted something unusual on a remote road near a landfill. A young woman's body lay abandoned. She was cold, lifeless, and missing her shoes. When officers arrived, they immediately suspected foul play. The marks on her throat were unmistakable. She had been strangled to death. Nearby, police found a few key pieces of evidence: a woman's watch, a leather jacket, and a black braided belt. It wasn't immediately clear who the victim was, so they released images of her distinctive tattoos, a lion's head and a pair of stars, hoping someone would recognize her. Back in town, one of Brittney's closest friends saw the news. The description sounded eerily familiar. She called the police, and soon enough, the body was confirmed to be Brittney Gargol. Police turned to Brittney's social media, trying to reconstruct her last moments. That's when they saw something strange. Post from Cheyenne Antoine, publicly asking Brittney where she was. By the time Cheyenne posted that, Brittney had already been dead for hours. Investigators brought Cheyenne in for questioning. She told them the two had gone bar hopping. At some point, Brittney met an older man in his 30s. According to Cheyenne, Brittney left with him, and that was the last she saw of her. It seemed like a reasonable alibi, until police reviewed the surveillance footage. While the girls had been seen at one of the pubs, there was no sign of them ever entering another one she mentioned. Another hole in Cheyenne's story emerged. She claimed that after leaving Brittney, she visited her uncle at an assisted living facility. She even had him back up her story when police called. But once officers checked security footage, it was clear that Cheyenne had never been there. Under pressure, the uncle changed his story. He admitted that Cheyenne had begged him to lie. Then, he revealed something even more disturbing. According to him, Cheyenne confessed that she and Brittney had gone to a motel with two black men, where they partied and took drugs. She claimed they got into a fight over cocaine, and when she came back from the bathroom, Brittney was dead. Investigators weren't buying it. The physical evidence at the scene didn't match her version of events, and there were no witnesses to confirm her story. Cheyenne stuck to her claims, refusing to talk any further. Without solid proof, police had no choice but to let her go. Brittney's family was devastated. Months passed and no arrests were made. It seemed like the case had hit a dead end, until police took another look at that last selfie. In the photo, Cheyenne was wearing a black braided belt, the same belt that had been found next to Brittney's body, the same belt that was used to strangle her. Police sent the belt for DNA testing, and when the results came back, it confirmed their suspicions. The unknown DNA at the crime scene belonged to Cheyenne Antoine. In 2017, more than 2 years after Brittney's death, police finally arrested Cheyenne for second-degree murder. Faced with undeniable evidence, Cheyenne admitted that she had been with Brittney that night. She claimed they had argued, but said she blacked out and had no memory of killing her best friend. When she woke up the next morning, she knew something terrible had happened, but she didn't know what. Without a clear motive, prosecutors struggled to prove intent. They eventually reduced the charge from murder to manslaughter, and Cheyenne pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to just 7 years in prison, a punishment that Brittney's family felt was far too lenient. Even after her sentencing, Cheyenne showed little remorse. She continued posting on Brittney's Facebook, writing messages about how much she missed her. It was as if she wanted to pretend she wasn't responsible for what happened. After serving just a portion of her sentence, Cheyenne was granted statutory release. But freedom didn't last long. She quickly racked up 15 serious charges while behind bars, including assaulting a correctional officer because he denied her a shower. Then, in 2022, her release was revoked after she was caught stealing a car and leading police on a high-speed chase. Witnesses reported that she had been pulling on door handles in a parking lot, looking for an unlocked vehicle. Once she found one with the keys inside, she jumped in and sped off, laughing as she crashed into another car. Cheyenne Antoine was once again behind bars, proving that she hadn't changed. She became eligible for parole in 2024, but I couldn't find any further details about what happened after that. Ann Faber was a 25-year-old woman. On the evening of September 29, 2017, she took a selfie, one that would later become infamous. That evening, Ann set out on a cycling trip, leaving from the city of Utrecht in the Netherlands. It wasn't unusual. She loved riding her bike through the Dutch countryside, a habit that gave her a sense of freedom. Her route ended in a small village. At 6:50 p.m., she stopped in to take a selfie, drenched by the rain. She sent it to her boyfriend, but what neither of them knew was that this would be the last time anyone would hear from her. Her phone last connected to a transmission tower just before 7:30 p.m. And then, nothing. Ann Faber disappeared without a trace. When Ann didn't come home that night, her boyfriend and family immediately knew something was wrong. She wasn't the type to vanish without a word. The next morning, her disappearance was reported to the police. At first, it was just a missing person case. Her friends, family, and volunteers searched for her relentlessly, hoping to find any clue about where she might be. Days passed. Then, on October 3rd, a breakthrough. Ann's coat was found. It was lying in a wooded area. 5 days after she disappeared, her bicycle was discovered. Then, her backpack. Each new piece of evidence raised more questions than answers. Where was Ann, and why were her belongings scattered across different locations? On October 8th, forensic investigators found something on her jacket. DNA. It was a match, and the man it belonged to had a past that no one could ignore. The DNA led police to a 27-year-old man who was already known to the justice system. He wasn't just any suspect. He was a convicted criminal with a history of violent and sexual offenses. His name was Michael Panhuis. At the time, Panhuis was being housed at the forensic psychiatric department in the village Ann had taken her last selfie. It was meant to be a secure facility, a place where dangerous criminals were slowly reintroduced into society under supervision. But despite his past, Panhuis had been given too many freedoms. He was allowed to move freely outside the institution. And on the night of September 29th, he crossed paths with Ann Faber. Panhuis later claimed that the encounter was an accident, that he had been riding his scooter down a forest path when he collided with Ann's bike. Ann reached for her phone to call the police. That's when Panhuis grabbed it from her hands and destroyed it. He forced her off the path, deeper into the woods. Then, in the darkness, he raped her, multiple times. Afterward, he put Ann, still alive, in handcuffs and forced her onto the back of his scooter. He drove her to an even more remote location. There, away from any possible witnesses, he made his final decision. Ann screamed for help when she saw a cyclist passing by. That's when Panhuis decided she couldn't be left alive. He took out a knife and slit her throat. After killing her, he buried her body under leaves, leaving it in a shallow grave. The next evening, Panhuis borrowed his mother's car. He drove to a remote area surrounded by dense forest and began digging a new grave. Then he returned to the place he had left Ann's body. He dug her up, loaded her into the car, and drove back to the remote location. Before burying her for the second time, he cleaned her body with chlorine. He wanted to erase any evidence, any trace of what he had done. Meanwhile, Ann's belongings were scattered across different locations. By October 9th, Panhuis was arrested, and just 2 days later, he confessed. He led authorities to Ann's body, buried in a nature reserve. Ann had suffered severe injuries, dozens of bruises and wounds, proof of the unimaginable violence she had endured. What made the whole story even more disturbing is that Panhuis should never have been free in the first place. He had already been convicted of raping 2 minors, and while he was at the psychiatric center, he assaulted 2 security guards and 3 employees. His file painted the picture of a deeply disturbed and dangerous man. Yet, instead of being kept in a high-security prison, he was in a psychiatric institution that failed to control him. The procedures that allowed Panhuis to be transferred to the forensic psychiatric department were careless. No proper risk assessments were done. No real safeguards were in place. In court, Van Huyse's lawyers argued that he hadn't planned to kill Anne, that it was an impulsive decision. Because of this, the charge of premeditated murder couldn't be proven. On July 17, 2018, the court sentenced him to 28 years in prison, followed by mandatory psychiatric treatment. October 2011, in Utah. 3 girls, best friends, had set out for an adventure. Like so many teenagers, they wanted to take pictures. Selfies to capture the fun, the scenery, and the moment. Essa Ricker and Kelsey Webster, both 15, and Kelsey's little sister, Savannah, just 13 years old, positioned themselves on the train tracks, posing for their photo. Behind them, the train approached. Just before the accident, Savannah had posted on Facebook. They waved at the westbound train as it drove past, but what they didn't know was that another train was coming from the opposite direction. Inside the locomotive, conductor John Anderson and engineer Michael Anderson spotted the girls. Michael leaned on the train's horn, sending a warning through the canyon, but the girls didn't react. Maybe they didn't hear it. Maybe they were too distracted, caught up in the excitement. Maybe, in those few final seconds, they did realize, but it was already too late. A train traveling at this speed can take more than a mile to come to a complete stop. There was nothing they could do. The conductor, John Anderson, later described those final moments in heartbreaking detail. We saw them for about 12 seconds until they disappeared from our sight and the train continued moving forward. When the train finally stopped, John ran back along the tracks. The first girl he reached had no pulse. The second was gone too. But then he heard a voice. It was Savannah. She was hurt, but alive. John knelt beside her, holding her hand, telling her that everything would be okay. Doctors in Salt Lake City worked to save Savannah. They discovered more than a dozen broken bones, internal bleeding, blood clots, and a severe brain injury. For 3 days, her family clung to hope. But on the 3rd day, Savannah's injuries became too much, and she passed away. For the train crew, the weight of that night never lifted. Michael, the engineer, barely spoke when he got home. He sat in silence, with his wife unable to express himself. John found solace in talking with his coworkers, but Michael never spoke about it. The nightmares stayed with him. The image of those 3 girls, smiling, haunted him. Savannah's mother, Jana Webster, said in a press conference, "The accident that took my daughter's lives was preventable. No one should have to go through this. Please, stay away from the tracks." It was supposed to be a trip to celebrate the new year, and Dragonovan, 23 years old, was excited to spend his holiday with friends. As they sat on the runway, ready for takeoff, he snapped a selfie, grinning at the camera, surrounded by friends. It was the last image ever taken of the passengers on Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501. It was December 28, 2014. Flight 8501 was scheduled to depart from Juanda International Airport in Surabaya, Indonesia at 5:20 a.m. to Singapore. A short, routine flight. At 5:35 a.m., the Airbus A320 lifted off into the dark morning sky. For the first 25 minutes, the flight was smooth. The aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, heading northwest over the Java Sea. At 6 a.m., an alert appeared on the aircraft's monitoring system, an issue with the rudder limiter. Nothing catastrophic. Captain Irianto, an experienced pilot, followed the standard procedure and reset the flight augmentation computers. The fault disappeared for a moment, but at 6:09 a.m., the alert returned. Again, the captain reset the system. At 6:11 a.m., the pilots noticed storm clouds ahead and requested permission to climb from 32,000 feet to 38,000 feet to avoid turbulence. Jakarta Air Traffic Control instructed them to wait, but as they waited, the rudder limiter issue occurred again. Captain Irianto, growing frustrated, made a fateful decision. This time he didn't just reset the system, he pulled the circuit breakers, completely shutting off the flight augmentation computers. The autopilot disengaged, the autothrottle cut out, and the plane was no longer in standard control mode. At that moment, the aircraft banked sharply to the left. First Officer Remy Plessel, caught off guard, overcorrected. The aircraft swayed violently, and then the nose pitched up. Within just 54 seconds, Flight 8501 went from 32,000 feet to 38,500 feet in an extreme climb. The climb rate exceeded 10,000 feet per minute, far beyond what the Airbus A320 was designed for. The plane stalled, and it began plummeting. Inside the cabin, passengers likely felt their stomachs drop as the plane nosedived. Alarms blared in the cockpit. Amidst the chaos, Captain Irianto made a confusing command. "Pull down." His words made no sense. Pull suggests pulling up. Down suggests pushing forward. First Officer Plessel, possibly disoriented, pulled back, sending the plane into an even steeper stall. Desperation filled the cockpit as the pilots struggled for control, but it was too late. At 6:20 a.m., Flight 8501 vanished from radar. Seconds later, the aircraft slammed into the Java Sea at an incredible speed. The impact was devastating. All 162 people on board died. In the days that followed, search teams scoured the waters. The bodies of 37 passengers were eventually pulled from the sea. Many others were never found. The captain's decision to reset the circuit breakers mid-flight, a move he had previously seen done on the ground, ultimately led to disaster, and the lack of clear communication in the cockpit sealed their fate. That final selfie, taken just before takeoff, is now a haunting reminder of the 162 lives that never made it to their destination. It started as an ordinary day at Shikiaku Wildlife Park in China. A businessman named Jia Lijun was visiting the park alone, capturing videos and photos to post on social media. He sent a video to a friend, enjoying himself in the park. His friend, surnamed Wu, later recalled how surreal it was. Jia had sent the video, and minutes later, things took a dark turn. The center of it all was an enormous walrus, weighing nearly 1.5 tons. This wasn't some random wild animal. It had lived at the park for over a decade, raised since it was a baby by its trainer, Duan. Jia was a big fan of this particular walrus. He entered the gated housing area and got as close as he could. He took selfies and filmed videos. But then, in an instant, everything changed. The walrus suddenly reached out, wrapping its powerful flippers around him from behind. Witnesses watched, unsure of what they were seeing. The walrus pulled him into the water. At first, onlookers didn't react. They thought it was an affectionate or playful gesture from the massive creature. The walrus had never shown aggression before, but Jia was struggling. The water churned as the walrus clung to him, its immense weight pressing down. Panic set in. Staff members rushed to the scene. Among them was Duan, the walrus's longtime caretaker. He had raised the animal from the time it was small. If anyone could calm it down, it was him. Without hesitation, Duan jumped into the water. But the moment the walrus saw him, it reacted, rushing toward him. What happened next was horrifying. The walrus grabbed Duan just as it had grabbed Jia. Both men were trapped. The walrus held them in an unbreakable grip, dragging them both beneath the surface. Minutes passed. Then, staff managed to intervene. They were finally able to retrieve the men from the walrus' grasp. But by then, it was too late. Both Jia and Duan were dead, drowned in what some initially thought was an act of playfulness. And that was the video. If you want to see more similar content, check out this video that YouTube thinks you will enjoy. Consider subscribing if you want to see more videos of me. Stay safe, and until next time.